Welcome everyone to the Wild and Scenic Rivers 101. My name is Risa Shimoda, and we have a couple of awesome presenters here today. And let's get to it. With us are Nancy Taylor, who goes by Taylor, who has worked for many years for the U.S. Forest Service as Wilderness and Wild and Scenic Rivers Manager, recently retired, and Lacy, also retired, but with many years working for the National Park Service, specifically on the Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers. So welcome, ladies.
Hello.
And this is the first in a series of 3 Wild and Scenic Rivers webinars that we'll be hosting this year. There'll be 2 coming after this within the next month or so. Please share your input in the chat box if you have a question, and we will follow up after with the recording and some good links for you to know going forward. I'm going to hand it right over to Liz.
Thanks, Risa. First, I'll start by talking about some history and factors that led to the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act before we get into more detail about the provisions of the Act. Next slide, Risa. So how did the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act come to be? Well, the river protection campaigns had begun by the early 20th century. The idea of national rivers and a National Rivers Act began gaining momentum in the 1940s, though it didn't come to fruition until 1968. As we'll talk about more, early framers envisioned a wild rivers bill focused on prohibiting dams on sections of river and wilderness in very primitive settings. But importantly, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act evolved to a framework that allows inclusion of a diverse range of free-flowing rivers, from some of the most remote rivers in the country, like the Selway in Idaho and Alaska rivers, to rivers flowing through significantly developed areas like the Lower American through Sacramento, California, and some of the New England rivers. This diversity provides its inherent strength and continued robustness. Next slide. If we go back as far as we can in history, rivers have always provided a place for people to create settlements. They're a source of sustenance and, of course, a great source of power. In earlier days, there were fewer impacts on rivers, but things changed. By the 1800s, the federal government, new slide, began developing rivers to meet the needs of a growing country. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was established in 1802. Its early work was building coastal fortifications to protect the nation's harbors and some civil works like jetties and piers. Over time, it began working to improve the nation's transportation system, and these projects included canals and rivers. In 1824, Congress charged the Army Corps of Engineers with removing sandbars, snags, and other obstacles to navigation on the Mississippi River and Ohio River and appropriated $75,000 for that purpose. Other rivers were later added in what has now become known as the Rivers and Harbors legislation. In this period, there were numerous surveys and studies exploring how canals might be used to connect large river systems and allow commerce to flow in between them. Next slide. In the late 1800s, cities and industry grew alongside one another and both depended on rivers. Water-powered early mills providing work that drew people to emerging industrial cities. Rivers provided a source of water for industry, and dams were constructed to regulate the flow of water from mill ponds, so there was a steady supply available for production. Companies bought water rights for distant water sources to ensure control of supply to the mills. Rivers also provided a means of waste disposal. This could include human waste, since many early sewer systems were designed to carry sewage to the river. It could also include industrial chemicals like dyes and acids, wood pulp, or animal byproducts from slaughterhouse waste. This photo is of Lowell, Massachusetts on the Merrimack River. Once the nation's leading producer of cotton textiles, Lowell is now a National Historic Park. This photo is from 1920, but the effects of industrialization on the Merrimack were evident much earlier. The fish runs had once sustained the Pennacook people who gathered at the falls near Lowell each spring. Next slide. In 1902, the first Reclamation Act passed, providing federal investment in irrigation projects in the western states that had federal land at the time and in Texas. And in 1907, the Reclamation Service, later called the Bureau of Reclamation, was created as the Department of Interior Bureau, previously under USGS. Increasingly, projects combine the benefits of providing water for irrigation, flood control, and hydropower to spark regional development. One site that had long been eyed as having great potential for these purposes was the Black Canyon of the Colorado River. In 1928, Congress authorized construction of a dam at this location. At the time, this is the largest dam ever constructed. It impounds Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the U.S. by volume. Building Hoover Dam was a massive undertaking. This was during the Great Depression. At its peak, more than 5,000 people were employed by the contractor, and Las Vegas's population of 5,000 grew almost instantly when more than 10,000 people who were unemployed came to try to work on the dam. This was dangerous work. More than 100 workers were killed on the job. Today, Hoover Dam provides water for more than 18 million people, irrigation for more than 1 million acres, as well as hydropower energy to 3 states, Nevada, Arizona, and California. The model of large projects combining irrigation with other benefits, including hydropower, flood control, and job creation, was used in other locations across the West. This photo is of workers at the Grand Coulee Dam on the Columbia River in Washington. Next slide. The New Deal used the construction of public dams as a tool to address poverty, improve the quality of life, and try to right the national economy. The justification for other projects was saving human life and property from flooding. One of the most devastating floods in U.S. history, the Great Mississippi River Flood of 1927, affected communities in 10 states. After heavy rainfall in summer 1926, the river swelled over the fall and into the winter, broke levees, and inundated 27,000 square miles, killing 500 people and displacing 700,000. In some locations, disproportionate effect on African Americans, pushing many to join the Great Migration to the North and Midwest. The Flood Control Act of 1928 authorized the Army Corps to build the world's largest system of levees, as well as channels and floodways transforming the Mississippi. Coming out of World War II, an iron triangle had emerged, comprised of elected officials, the federal agencies, the Army Corps, and the Bureau of Reclamation, and interest groups, local and regional boosters, that virtually ensured dams would continue to be proposed, permitted, and built. Next slide. These examples have mostly focused on dams, but many other threats to rivers developed, including but certainly not limited to channelization, dredging and filling, shoreline development, upland development that decreases recharge and increases runoff and flooding, and riverine habitat loss. Next slide, please. Water pollution became a top environmental concern for the American public and elected officials. The 1960s and 70s was a time of public outrage over the impacts of industrialization on the quality of people's lives, coupled with new environmental consciousness in the U.S. Congress. During this period, a number of new laws geared to protect natural areas and the environment were passed that would have a direct effect on wild and scenic rivers, including but not limited to the Clean Water Act that first became law in 1972. This is a photograph of one of the most famous examples of water pollution in U.S. history. Though it isn't the most famous image of the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, Ohio, the Cuyahoga was one of the most polluted rivers in the country. It caught fire 13 times, most notably in 1969. Those images of a river in flames galvanized the nation's attention around pollution problems. Next slide. This is a photo of the Central Arizona Project, a diversion canal that carries water more than 300 miles from the Colorado River to central and southern Arizona. It supplies water to Phoenix and Tucson, as well as water for smaller communities and for irrigation. It provides for flood control, outdoor recreation, and wildlife conservation. It was authorized in the Colorado River Basin Project Act of 1968, and I thought this was interesting to note that it happened to be signed into law 2 days prior to the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. Next slide, please. By the 1960s, in the U.S., 70,000 large dams greater than 6 feet had been built, and many more were planned and purposed. There were contentious debate around many of the projects. They were not a foregone conclusion. For example, the Boulder Canyon Hoover Dam project was for many years mired in controversy over the federal role in public versus private power. For many of these projects, there was contention over the federal government investing in a national project that would provide benefits for a particular state or region, and questions of whether the investment was needed and if the promised benefits would actually follow. Some of these dams are producing power and providing irrigation water for projected future farms and populations that existed only on paper. When a new project was proposed, people could look to dams or diversions elsewhere and see the problems. They could see what had been forever lost, many miles of river and the natural and cultural values associated with it, and they might question if the benefits were worth the costs. Protection of rivers evolved from fights to save parkland and wilderness, like opposition to the 1923 damming of Tuolumne River that flooded the Hetch Hetchy Valley in Yosemite. The valley has been important to the Miwok and Paiute native peoples as a seasonal gathering place for thousands of years, its scenic beauty often compared to Yosemite Valley in the south. The city of San Francisco had long been looking to the Tuolumne River as a source of pure water with a high elevation that would allow it to also provide power. The city had made unsuccessful attempts to acquire water rights, and after the 1906 earthquake and the fires that razed much of the city, the Interior Department granted the city's water rights application. A well-known conservation figure who opposed the flooding of Hetch Hetchy was John Muir. For more than a decade, Muir and the Sierra Club led opposition to a dam at Hetch Hetchy, which would create a reservoir within the Yosemite National Park, which had only recently become a national park in 1890, and was seen by the Sierra Club as in need of more protections, not less. The Sierra Club campaign coordinated with other groups to get citizens to write elected officials and newspaper editors urging them to oppose the project. Those in favor of the project, and this included Gifford Pinchot, pointed to, among other arguments, the number of people who would benefit both at that time and into the future. So the Hetch Hetchy project was authorized in 1913. O'Shaughnessy Dam was completed in 1923, and Hetch Hetchy Reservoir flooded the Hetch Hetchy Valley. And since 1934, it has provided water to San Francisco and other Bay Area municipalities. Next slide. So let's talk in more detail about the convergence of ideas and experiences and personalities that shaped the formation of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. Many of the early framers were focused on protecting specific rivers important to them that were threatened by dams or other major water resources projects. These brothers, John and Frank Craighead, grew up canoeing the Potomac River. They served in World War II, came back, and moved to the Western U.S., where as wildlife biologists, they pioneered the use of radio telemetry for wildlife study and also floated many wild Western rivers. They had seen changes in the Potomac, how mining and development had polluted its waters. They feared this would be the fate of the rivers of the West if they weren't protected. In the late 1950s, the Army Corps proposed building Spruce Park Dam on the Craighead's beloved Flathead River, a river known for its fisheries and wildlife. It would be similar to and connected to the nearby Hungry Horse Dam to provide for hydropower generation. It would back up water for 11 miles, and the Craigheads were among those who opposed the Spruce Park Dam. But the Craigheads thought beyond this one dam and beyond the Flathead River. In 1955, they proposed a system for categorizing all rivers in the United States into 4 classes. They thought they would make plain how rare wild rivers like the Flathead are and their value to the nation as a reference systems. At an academic conference in 1957, John Craighead proposed a federally protected wild river system. The brothers wrote about the idea for a wild river system in Montana Wildlife Magazine. In 1959, the Craigheads testified in support of such a system before a Senate subcommittee. As the idea of a national system gained traction, Secretary of Interior Stuart Udall asked Frank Craighead to prepare a paper on river classification. Next slide. The convergence that made the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act depended on early champions in the legislature, and these included Senator Frank Church, a 4-term senator from Idaho, Congressman John Saylor, a 12-term congressman from Pennsylvania, and Senator Gaylord Nelson, a 2-term governor of Wisconsin, followed by 3 terms in the Senate. Next slide, please. The Wild and Scenic Rivers Act was passed by Congress and signed into law by President Johnson in 1968. A tumultuous time in American history and also a transformative one. This was a time of increasing awareness that resources that may have seemed infinite had limits and could be exhausted or irretrievably degraded. It was a period when parks and conservation areas were being created around the world and when some of our landmark environmental laws passed. Some of the other environmental or protected area laws that were created during this time were the Clean Air Act, Wilderness Act, National Trails System Act, NEPA, Clean Water Act, Coastal Zone Management Act, Endangered Species Act, and the National Forest Management Act. Next slide, please. The Wild and Scenic Rivers Act was signed into law on October 2nd, 1968. Also in these photos are Congressman Saylor, Stuart Udall, and Lady Bird Johnson. Lady Bird Johnson was a big influence on President Johnson and probably had an influence in him supporting these kinds of legislation. Next slide, please. The clear intent of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act was to establish a national system of free-flowing rivers to complement the nation's policy of dams and other construction that affected the free-flowing condition of selected rivers. Next slide. Estimates just a side note, estimates in 2023, there are currently 860,000 miles of river dammed, dredged, or channelized. This is about 24% of the nation's 3.5 million miles of rivers, which are not free-flowing. Comparatively, Congress's complement to this policy of development includes designation of 13,467 miles of free-flowing rivers under the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, which is slightly more than 1/3 of 1% of the total miles of rivers in the United States. Next slide, please. The national system is hugely varied and diverse. It varies in values and setting. There's a wide range of natural, cultural, and recreational values. The settings can vary from remote rivers in Alaska, Idaho, and Oregon to rural countryside of New Hampshire, Ohio, and Massachusetts. The national system includes iconic Western rivers such as the Rogue to Black rivers and Blackwater rivers in the southeast, like the Black Creek and Saline Bayou, to desert rivers in the southwest, like Rio Grande and Verde, and more developed rivers like the Lower American in California. One of the newest additions, the River Styx in Oregon, is underground segment of Cave Creek as it flows through Oregon Caves National Monument. This designation is unique, the first and only underground river in the national system. There's also a very big diversity in size and configuration, from designated components with only a few miles, like horse pasture in North Carolina that only has 4.2 miles, or the Wickahoney Creek in Idaho, 1.5 miles, to designations including the entire river, headwaters to mouth, like the Middle Fork Salmon in Idaho, 103 miles. Main stem and principal tributaries, such as the Middle Fork Clearwater, designated component includes Middle Fork, Loxa, and Selway rivers. Watershed designations such as the Smith in California and White Clay Creek in Pennsylvania. Different management types include rivers flowing entirely on federal lands with federal administration, rivers flowing through various ownerships with federal administration, rivers designated under Section 2A of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act with state administration, and partnership rivers where there are no federal lands and there's administration by a local council. Not representative designations are not spread equally throughout the country among different political regions or ecological reasons. There's a few reasons for that. There might be more federal land ownership in the West. There's more existing free-flowing rivers, less densely populated areas, and maybe some support from congressional leadership. The protective management, however, is the same on all the rivers. No matter their values or setting, classification, or management types, they all share the same basic protective management guaranteed in the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. All wild and scenic rivers require protective management and partnerships to protect and enhance values, even those rivers that flow entirely on federal lands. Next slide, please. In summary, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act has a strong historical legacy that is important to remember when setting out to manage your own wild and scenic river. There are deliberate intentions for all of its components and policy. Next slide. Now for some of those details from Taylor.
Thank you, Liz. And Risa's going to show a short video, and I want to just introduce what the context or background of this series of videos is. We being a team of people from different agencies and partners like Risa with River Management Society, created a series of bite-sized videos that can be found on rivers.gov. And I'll talk more about where to find this and a lot of other resources at the end of the webinar today. So while the series was inspired to support river managers who had a newly designated wild and scenic river, the content of each video is fully relevant to any designated river. So we'll be sharing some of the videos with you today to just introduce them to you and so you're aware of them. So Risa, if you could play that.
Wild and scenic rivers have river-related values that need to be identified and protected. We are going to review some tips to get your planning team started. This video takes a closer look at some key terms and best practices for determining your river's values. These river-related values are the free-flowing condition, water quality, and one or more outstandingly remarkable values, or ORVs. So, what does this mean? The free-flowing condition is a natural condition without impoundments, diversions, straightening, riprapping, or other modifications. A river values report or assessment describes the existing condition, including baseline flow information, and any up or downstream dams, diversions, or other structures that could negatively affect flow. Water quality means the condition of the water, including chemical, physical, and biological characteristics. In assessing water quality, specialists define water-based attributes specific to the designated river. The team will document baseline conditions and any specific challenges river managers must address, such as temperature or turbidity, that do not conform to standards. In addition to looking at water quality and free flow, you'll also need to identify and confirm or establish, if not previously determined, the justification for the ORVs. Each designated river must have at least one ORV. These could include scenic, recreational, fish and wildlife, historic, or other values. ORVs should be defined for each river segment. Sources for determining and describing ORVs can be traditional ecological knowledge, best available scientific information, historical documents, legislation, previous river studies, and other means of public input. Along the way and before finalizing your ORVs, collaborate with tribes in your region and invite public input. People familiar with the river may have specific stories, data, records, or photos about unique resources in the corridor that support the ORV or region of comparison you seek to establish. An ORV must be a rare, unique, or exemplary feature at a regional or national scale. The region of comparison provides the basis for meaningful comparative analysis and should be identified by an interdisciplinary team for each ORV category. Regions of comparison may differ between resources and can include geographic areas or ranges of species. The ORV must be river-related, meaning it must be located in the river or on its shorelands within the designated corridor, or owe its existence to the presence of the river. Finally, keep in mind that ORV descriptions reflect conditions that may change over time. Some river corridors may experience notable changes before ORVs or a CRMP are finalized. For example, wildfire or flood events can alter species habitat or a river's course. In that case, you will need to evaluate changed conditions and determine if that ORV is still present or if it is likely to return. Determining ORVs can be a challenge, but may well be the most important contribution you will ever make to the development of your plan and the protection of your wild and scenic river. Fortunately, there is information and guidance about this topic. The next video is about readying your CRMP. For more information, check out these links.
So to get into a little more detail about river values, to be eligible for designation, a river must be in a free-flowing condition and possess one or more outstandingly remarkable values.
Oh, hold on.
Oh,
I'm gonna go back and go full screen for us, get rid of these tabs. Because this is what I wasn't able to go back to, when we were doing the screen. So just bear with me. And so again, I'll go to full screen. And we'll just pause when we introduce the videos. Not that you don't want to hear Lisa talk more. Okay, hold on a sec. Okay, so I went too many, sorry. I went way too high. Oh, sorry. So this is where we were, right?
yes.
Okay. Okay, the video has finished and you can start again.
Okay. Thanks for showing that video, Risa. And we'll go into more detail now about river values. And so to be eligible for designation, a river must, so we'll go to the next slide, please. Thanks. A river must be in free-flowing condition and possess one or more outstandingly remarkable values. So these outstandingly remarkable values are river-dependent, natural, cultural, or recreational resources that are unique, rare, or exemplary at a regional or national scale, which you heard about in the video as well. Rivers are suitable for designation if the river's free-flowing character, water quality, and outstandingly remarkable values, you often hear them referred to as ORVs, will be protected through the designation, and that designation is found to be the best method for protecting the river corridor. Next slide. So let's talk in a little more detail about what free-flowing means. So there's a definition in the Act in Section 16B, and the concept comes from Section 1B of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. And I'm not going to read the whole definition, but some of the key words in it you'll see up here on the screen, and also I'll just read from the definition: existing or flowing in a natural condition without impoundment, diversion, straightening, riprapping, or other modification of the waterway. The existence of low dams, diversion works, and other minor structures at the time any river is proposed for inclusion in the system shall not automatically bar its consideration for such inclusion, but it does not authorize, intend, or encourage future construction of structures like that. Next slide. So water quality is the next river value that we'll talk about. So Congress declared its intent to protect the water quality of rivers added to the national system in Section 1B of the Act. And it further specified that river administering agencies should cooperate with the EPA and state water pollution control agencies to eliminate or diminish water pollution. And that's found in Section 12C of the Act. There's a variety of approaches that are used to protect or enhance water quality that may include developing a cooperative water quality plan with the EPA and state agencies, cooperative funding to assess or remediate problems, provide technical assistance to landowners and communities, and this could be through local conservation districts as an example. Water quality is also a component of river classification. For example, wild rivers are defined as unpolluted. So water quality protection is a fundamental reason for the establishment of the National Wild and Scenic Rivers System, and river managers, state and federal water pollution control agencies, and other federal agencies or departments with jurisdiction over lands adjacent to or bordering a wild and scenic river have a statutory responsibility to protect the water quality of these rivers. The protection of water quality focuses on maintaining existing water quality, while enhancement includes water quality improvement or restoration to conditions better than those that existed at the time of designation, if that's possible. Next slide. So to talk more in detail about outstandingly remarkable values, or ORVs, the Act intentionally does not clearly define ORVs because they should be unique to each river and determined during the study period. The range of resources that could be included as an ORV is really broad, but all values do need to be river related. So the categories might include natural, historical, cultural, scenic, or recreational qualities, or other qualities that are specific to that river. So to be an ORV, the Act states that the resource should be located in the river or on its immediate shoreland. So this is generally within a quarter mile on each side of the river. Contribute substantially to the functioning of the river ecosystem and or owe their location or existence to the presence of the river. So just as an example, to put it in some context for you, a nationally significant ORV would be rare, unique, or exemplary at a national scale. So if it's unique, it's one of a kind, it's rare, it's uncommon, it's exemplary, it's best of the best. So a recreational boating experience that draws visitors from all over the nation might qualify as a nationally significant recreation resource and could potentially be an ORV for the river. So we're going to shift gears a little bit here, and we'll go to the next slide and talk about comprehensive river management plans. Another video that I'm just going to mention as a resource is the CRMP. That's, as you see, the acronym on the slide is how you'll often see these referred to. Video 3 is another resource that talks about the CRMP pre-planning process. So I just want to mention that as one you can refer to. We're not going to show it today, but we mention it as a resource for you. So I will also say that when we're talking about comprehensive river management plans, the context I'm talking about them in is designated wild and scenic rivers, and a CRMP is required. And we'll talk about this more in the next slide. So we'll go there. So the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act was generically amended in 1986 to require a CRMP, and it explains a plan's context in Section 3D1. So again, it's required for all congressionally designated wild and scenic rivers, and it's supposed to be completed within 3 full fiscal years unless another time frame is specified. So the list of CRMP contents that you see on the screen is derived from specific sections of the Act. So describing existing resources specifically, or especially the ORVs, is found in sections 1B, 3D1, and 10A, the intent of the Act, and the 1986 amendment requiring the CRMP, and the Protect and Enhance mandate. Defining goals and desired conditions is found in sections 1B and 10A. So again, that purpose of the Act in 1B and the Protect and Enhance mandate in section 10A. And the third one, addressing development of lands and facilities, is also derived from that 1986 amendment requiring the CRMP. Next slide. The plan should do all of these things in the bullets on the slide. So addressing water quality issues and in-stream flow requirements. So that's drawn from, addressing user capacities comes from the 1986 amendment. Addressing water quality issues and in-stream flow is derived from section 12C, which tells us to cooperate with the EPA, and 13C, the reservation of water in quantities necessary for the purposes of the Act. Reflecting a collaborative approach with all stakeholders is drawn from section 10E, which talks about cooperative agreements with the state, and section 11B1 of the Act, which also refers to cooperation with the state. Identifying regulatory authorities of other governmental agencies is from section 7A of the Act with the Federal Power Commission, now called the FERC. And the Federal Power Act, again referring to the section 10A Protect and Enhance mandate. That's section 12, A of cooperative agreements of the state, and 13A is the jurisdiction of the states. Including a monitoring strategy refers back to sections 1B and 10A, which we've already talked about. Section 3D2 allowed for review and revision, if necessary, of pre-1986 plans to include elements described in section 3D1 within 10 years. So at the time, by 1996. So a detailed description of ORVs is necessary as a framework for development of management direction in the CRMP. Next slide. So now we'll show a video. This is the 6th video in the series, and it'll help you to understand what goes into writing the CRMP for a designated river. So
A comprehensive river management plan, or CRMP, must be prepared for your river within 3 years of congressional designation. Here's a breakdown of what you and your team will need to do. The purpose of the CRMP is to outline the steps to protect and enhance the river's free-flowing condition, water quality, and outstandingly remarkable values, known as ORVs. You will need to analyze the environmental effects of the CRMP proposed actions under the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, in a separate document. More about the NEPA process is covered in Video 7. Here are the primary elements of your CRMP that must be included, discussed, or considered. River values descriptions and baseline conditions. These include free flow, water quality, and ORVs. A boundary that protects and enhances river values. Until official boundaries are established, an interim boundary will be in effect. You and your team must decide if the Act's general guidance for interim boundaries is sufficient to protect and enhance the river's values, or if a new boundary should be developed. Consider private or other lands and the location of river-related values. Note that there are limitations to the number of acres per mile that can be included in a wild and scenic river boundary. These limitations in Alaska are different than the other 49 states. Classifications for each segment of the designated river as wild, recreational, or scenic. Keep in mind that the 3 river classifications are different from the river's ORVs, even though the language is similar. Current land uses, such as grazing, and permitted or general public use, and level of development in the corridor, for example, presence, extent of structures, channel armoring, diversions, and withdrawals. Management direction to protect and enhance river values, including immediate actions or actions that would be implemented if specific negative conditions are reached. Desired conditions that outline a broad vision of the resource conditions and visitor experience the agency should strive to achieve and maintain within the designated river corridor and specific relevant goals. Management and future development of lands and facilities. While a CRMP will not restrict private land use or rights in the corridor, consider including a voluntary framework for development and activities on non-federal lands, and criteria for acquiring private lands from willing sellers. User capacity for the corridor, along with the indicators and thresholds for monitoring that use. Water quality management considerations, and in-stream flow protection strategies, which may include quantifying and securing federal reserved water rights. Engage with tribal nations and indigenous communities early in the planning process to ensure the CRMP appropriately identifies and addresses traditional, contemporary, and future wild and scenic river-related uses and values. Collaboration with stakeholders, including agencies with regulatory authorities. A monitoring plan for tracking river corridor impacts from various types of land uses, including recreation, to help ensure that desired conditions are met. That was an overview of the components of a comprehensive river management plan. For detailed information or examples, visit rivers.gov. The next video is about environmental analysis. For more information, check out these links.
And then I will turn it over to Liz to talk about Partnership River CRMPs.
Thank you, Taylor. The key differences on a partnership river, and we will talk a little bit more about partnership rivers, is that the process is a very collaborative process. And we use expertise from local knowledge that builds on local regulations. And the plan is developed during the study process of a partnership river and can be implemented even if the wild and scenic designation is stalled or doesn't come to be. Partnership rivers are the type of rivers that are managed by local councils because there are no federal lands associated generally with a partnership river. There's going to be a very good, more information will be available and an in-depth look at Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers at the National Wilderness Skills Institute, June 3rd and 4th, and we'll talk more about that in a little while. The benefits of having a partnership wild and scenic designation are vast. Municipalities, businesses, and residents and landowners along partnership wild and scenic rivers have come to identify a number of benefits that accrue to the local communities as a result of the designation. Among these benefits are the plan that can be implemented regardless of designation, national recognition and prestige, a boost to the local economy, especially if the wild and scenic designation is promoted, federal agency technical and financial assistance to implement the river management plan and improvement projects. Cooperative agreements are primary mechanism used to provide assistance, including supplemental federal agency funding. Continued collaboration within stakeholder groups. Additional benefits that accrue to the local communities as a result of a designation include increased ability to leverage additional grants for a range of activities such as fish passage enhancement, land protection, youth education. The agency review of federally assisted water resources projects to protect locally identified river values, and a locally appointed river council that I mentioned that provides long-term framework to guide future management across local jurisdictions. Next slide. These are a few of the projects that we have seen over the years that are funded. These councils are funded every year with some federal funding through Congress. And so the local councils working with the federal agencies can do enhancement projects such as this public canoe launch on the Lamprey River in New Hampshire, a dam removal project to restore fish passage on the Musconetcong River in New Jersey, youth education on the Morris River in New Jersey, wildlife studies and protection on the Wekiva River in Florida, and working with local land trusts and municipalities to preserve land along the rivers and their tributaries and throughout the watershed. Next slide, please. Right now, partnership rivers only exist in the eastern half of the country, but successful partnerships exist on other wild and scenic rivers as well. Other wild and scenic rivers, such as the Upper Deschutes in Oregon, flow through significant blocks of non-federal land. Successful partnerships exist on the Upper Deschutes River among a variety of stakeholders interested in guiding management of the non-federal riverfront lands and coordinating multiple and sometimes overlapping planning efforts. The development of these U.S. Forest Service river partnerships coincided with the partnership model established by the National Park Service in the Northeast and used similar approaches to solve similar challenges. The success of these partnerships creates an opportunity to build on these models and provides an avenue for the designation of additional wild and scenic river segments on non-federal lands in other parts of the United States. Next slide, please. Switching gears a tiny bit, but related to the partnership rivers model, is that there are several different internal capacity scenarios for wild and scenic rivers. On federal lands rivers, there will likely be agency staff. On partnership wild and scenic rivers, since there is typically no federal land and only one or two agency staff, internal capacity depends on a network of local players to fill the roles needed to manage the river. Next slide, please. To talk a little bit more about internal capacity for managing wild and scenic rivers, here's another video. Risa, can you get that one started?
At this point, you've identified the immediate next steps to take with a new Wild and Scenic River designation, or steps you're planning to take to get ready for a designation in the future. Let's talk about how you can begin to establish official contacts and identify needs on your planning unit. First, ask, what do you have and what do you need? Determine the existing levels of development, activities, and operations. Identify what additional resources you need to manage this new designation. What river-related activities and uses existed when the river was designated? Do you have river-specific programs in place? Does your river have facilities like docks or boat ramps? Are there parking, bathrooms, or picnic areas? Does interpretive and wayfinding signage exist? Are you collecting river data or doing other types of monitoring? Does baseline data exist? Next, review your river's facilities and operations to understand the characteristics, capacity, and condition of existing infrastructure and the activities they support. If you see inconsistency between current practices and requirements of the new designation legislation, ask for assistance. Look at your current staffing and request the specific hiring and funding you need to manage your river. Identify the point of contact and the various resource specialists who can develop the initial River Values Report. Write the Comprehensive River Management Plan, conduct NEPA compliance, update public websites, coordinate with regional or state programs, and complete reporting requirements. Identify the team responsible for developing and/or implementing your management plan, and hire river rangers or other field staff to focus on protecting river values. Include experts, such as those with scenic and cultural values or wilderness expertise related to your river's outstandingly remarkable values and special area designations. Assign resource specialists and planners to help you develop your initial River Values Report. Initiate the Comprehensive River Management Plan and conduct NEPA compliance. Specialists may be brought in, such as a surveyor or cartographer, once the official river corridor boundary is ready to be finalized. At this point, you should evaluate your staff's training needs. Offer training that provides a basic understanding of Wild and Scenic Rivers designation-related legal requirements, classification, and outstandingly remarkable values. Prepare them for the comprehensive river management planning process. Request training from your local, regional, or national leadership. As you assess your internal capacity, begin coordinating your education and communication strategy. Develop a messaging plan and materials to explain the designation to the public. Consider the various users and stakeholders and create relevant, inclusive materials that welcome people of all classes, cultures, and abilities. Learn and share about tribal uses and practices. Document concerns related to the protection of culturally significant values, uses, and practices. Share a draft project timeline with the public so they know what to expect from you and when. Consider links or posts to agency websites, social media channels, and rivers.gov to provide the public an overview. Finally, start building an image and video library of your river. Start with rivers.gov to find example stories, videos, and images. Don't reinvent the wheel. Find information about river management skills and expertise, including river management core competencies, at the River Management Society's River Training Center and on rivers.gov/training. You should now have an understanding of how you can work with and train staff. The next video in the series is about preparing your comprehensive river management plan. For more information, check out these links.
River and resource protection is driven by local zoning and land use laws. No federal acquisition of land for wild and scenic river purposes is one of the very differing traits of a partnership approach. Next slide, please. The success of a partnership river designation relies on the individual contributions of a number of entities. Each supports the partnership in different ways. The administering agency, typically the National Park Service so far, provides technical and financial assistance via cooperative agreement to the partner organization and the local river council. The administering agency also conducts all Section 7 reviews. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Partner organizations, which might be a watershed association or a land trust, coordinate with local officials and the River Management Council and often serve as a fiduciary role for the council. Partners and river councils jointly implement the river management/stewardship plan and conduct stewardship activities. Nonprofits support these activities through its voluntary actions such as providing matching funds and mapping expertise, education, and outreach programs, or conducting various kinds of research. Next slide, please. Now I'll turn it over to Taylor to talk some more about Section 7 of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act.
Thanks, Liz. So Risa will bring the video up for us and show that. I'll just mention that there is another webinar on May 6th that goes into really good detail about Section 7. We're just going to introduce the concept today so that you have a general understanding of it, but just so you know that there is a webinar coming up that will talk in a lot more detail.
You have a newly designated wild and scenic river on your unit, and projects are proposed within or adjacent to the river corridor. You may have heard that these projects may need to be evaluated under Section 7. Let's take a look at what this means and what situations require a Section 7 review. The name Section 7 refers to the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, Section 7, which addresses restrictions on federally assisted water resource projects that occur below the ordinary high water mark or between the bed and banks of the river, including those on private land. The ordinary high water mark may be on the valley flat or on the floodplain outside of the active channel. The intent of Section 7A is to keep certain rivers free-flowing. While Section 7 applies to both designated and study rivers, this video will focus on designated rivers. Section 7 prohibits new Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, commonly referred to as FERC, hydroelectric projects, while providing protection from the effects of other water resource projects. Evaluating the effects and whether a project may occur in a designated river is called the Section 7 analysis and subsequent determination. There are two situations that trigger a Section 7 analysis and determination. 1. Projects proposed within a designated wild and scenic river corridor, and 2. Projects proposed upstream, downstream, or on a tributary of a designated wild and scenic river corridor. A Section 7 analysis and determination also applies if the project involves any type of federal assistance. Federal assistance includes permits, funding, loans, grants, licenses, or technical assistance. When there is federal assistance, Section 7 applies on both public and private land. For projects within the Wild and Scenic Corridor, the River Administering Agency determines if the project would have a direct and adverse effect on the river values, including free-flowing condition, water quality, and each ORV for which a river was designated. Examples of projects in this category are dams, diversions, restoration and construction projects, boat ramps, and stabilization and channelization projects. For projects upstream, downstream, or at a tributary of the designated river, the River Administering Agency evaluates project proposals under the Invade the Area or Unreasonably Diminish standard. Invade implies there would be encroachment or intrusion. Unreasonably diminish requires an evaluation of the magnitude of loss to a river value. Projects that meet this definition may include dams and upstream diversion structures. A Section 7 analysis will be conducted by the responsible person on your unit. They'll seek input from project proponents, landowners, and other stakeholders before issuing a project determination. Additional information related to Section 7 on both designated and study rivers and a helpful flowchart is available at rivers.gov. The next video in the series is about the effects of climate change. For more information, check out these links.
So that Section 7 of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act is a very important way that Congress empowers river administering agencies to protect designated and congressionally authorized study rivers. The intent of this Section 7 is to keep these rivers free-flowing by prohibiting future dam building or other modifications of the waterway that could affect the free-flowing condition of those rivers. You'll hear it called the heart of the act, and protecting rivers from the harmful effects of federally assisted water resources projects proposed within the river corridor, below, above, or on a tributary to the river. And that's assuming a nexus to the designated wild and scenic river values. Standards of evaluation under Section 7 vary depending on which federal agency assists and where the project is located. Section 7B of the Act applies to congressionally authorized study rivers. And so Section 7 is intended to keep designated rivers free from structures in the river's bed or banks or other waterway modifications. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit more about a water resources project and what that means. And the definition, it does include certain projects under the Federal Power Act. And then other water resources projects are described in the definition written by the Interagency Wild and Scenic Rivers Coordinating Council. And I'll just read part of that. In addition to projects licensed by the FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, water resources projects could include dams, water diversion projects, fisheries habitat and watershed restoration or enhancement, bridges and other roadway construction or reconstruction projects, bank stabilization, channelization, levee construction, recreation facilities such as boat ramps and fishing piers, and activities that require a 404 permit from the Army Corps of Engineers. So again, there will be more detail on that in the following webinar. Next slide. So just to talk about where a water resources project has to be to qualify under that definition, within the bed and banks or below the ordinary high water mark of the river is essentially one of the ways you can think about it is, does any part of the project get wet at any time? So, and then federal assistance is also defined, and these Code of Federal Regulation definitions are referenced up here on the slide. So federal assistance is defined as any assistance by an authorizing agency before, during, or after construction of the project. So it could be a license, permit, preliminary permit, or other authorization granted by the FERC. Similarly, a license, permit, or authorization granted by the Army Corps, and can also be technical assistance, such as from the River Administering Agency. Next slide. So there's a connection here to the Protect and Enhance mandate, which we've mentioned, Section 10A of the Act. And so the main point is that the legal requirement to complete a Section 7 for a water resources project is connected to protecting and enhancing river values. Next slide. So to summarize what Section 7, the power in this section of the Act, it provides a framework for protecting river values. So the kind of activity, does it qualify as a water resources project? And there will be more discussion about defining and recognizing what that is in the webinar next week. Specific evaluation standards that apply to designated and study rivers, and then federal agency roles that are related to licensing and assisting these water resources projects, and also include the really important role of river administering agencies. And I'll turn it over to Liz to talk about Section 7 in partnership rivers.
Yeah, so because of the different circumstances on Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers, conducting a Section 7 review but it does provide the same level of scrutiny in the final outcomes as any protected wild and scenic river. But it really depends more on working with the local expertise and input of partners that are there on the river. given that there's minimal federal agency staff, and there's also a desire to enhance the partnership. So there's a strong, next slide, please. A strong element of collaboration, working together to look at the plans, to discuss the pros and cons of various aspects of things, and actually going out on site to look at the situation firsthand. Next slide, please. Switching gears once again, there's been a lot of change, and new threats and challenges have developed since the signing of the Act in 1968. A lot of things are emerging and continue to do so. The following video, which Risa will play, provides some guidance on these new issues. So go ahead and play that video.
You and your team are responsible for managing a newly designated wild and scenic river. You'll need to prepare for the effects of climate change on the river values, visitors, and your facilities. Here, we'll discuss where to begin and what you should consider. First, contact a climate change specialist or coordinator. Your agency should have someone who can offer guidance on how to incorporate the potential effects of climate change into your wild and scenic river planning. And they may also know of an existing vulnerability assessment for your area that may depict or address how climate change is affecting or could affect your watershed. Next, understand how your Comprehensive River Management Plan, or CRMP, addresses climate change. The CRMP should consider the potential effects of climate change to river values. For instance, your river could be in a setting predicted to see more frequent and severe rain and flood events. Other potential effects from climate change could include increased wildfire risk, or change in river volume or channel. Be sure to consider how negative and positive effects relate to each other. For example, groundwater influences may buffer extreme water temperature changes, but a loss of certain species may occur due to warming water. Your CRMP should also include management actions to adapt to these effects. These management actions could involve relocation, maintenance, improvement, and construction of facilities using materials that can withstand a range of climate stressors, replacing undersized road stream crossings with structures that can accommodate larger flows and provide improved aquatic organism passage, an increase in the amounts of large in-channel wood to absorb more frequent and severe peak flows, reconnection of stream channels to floodplains, or preservation of the erodible stream corridor. Finally, public education is an important river management tool. In all steps of river management, it is good practice to find ways to inform visitors about how they can reduce the impacts of climate change, whether at the river or at home. This video provides a brief overview and only touches on climate change in relation to wild and scenic rivers. Look to your climate change specialist or coordinator, along with a growing body of online resources for more information, or visit rivers.gov for more on wild and scenic rivers. Thank you for watching this series of videos on wild and scenic rivers. For more information, check out these links.
So we wanted to start wrapping up this webinar and thinking about how you can find tools, training, and resources, and people, websites, and organizations with the idea of connection, helping you all to build community and support. This isn't an exhaustive list of what's available, but it's a good place to start when you need help and you're looking for information or somebody to talk to about answering questions. Next slide. So these are resources that we rely upon and we refer to them, and I would encourage you to talk to contacts in your agency directly for new information, updates, and changes on any agency direction. I've mentioned the Interagency Wild and Scenic Rivers Coordinating Council, and I'm going to talk more about rivers.gov, which is a hub that they maintain that has so many really incredible resources to help guide you. There are technical papers, ways to contact council members, and a lot more on the council in a following slide. The nationwide rivers inventory is a listing of more than 4,500 free-flowing river segments in the United States that have been identified as eligible or potentially eligible for inclusion in the National Wild and Scenic Rivers System. These NRI, you'll hear them referred to, river segments possess one or more regionally or nationally significant, outstandingly remarkable natural or cultural values, and all federal agencies must seek to avoid or mitigate actions that would adversely affect NRI river segments. And so there's a very nice interactive map and lots of good information on that NRI site. Next slide. So I want to talk about rivers.gov, which I just mentioned a minute ago. I go in there almost every day in my work with rivers. Again, it's built and maintained by the Interagency Council that I just talked about, and really it is the premier resource to find information about wild and scenic rivers, and has so much information beyond wild and scenic rivers. So would really recommend that you go there and you bookmark it. I have it right in my bookmark list and go in there all the time. Next slide. So here's the page for the Interagency Council. You go into rivers.gov and they have a really nice page that has a lot of background about how they were formed, who they are, and what they do. So if you go to the home page of rivers.gov and scroll down to the bottom, you will find a link to the council's page. Next slide. So here we have the River Management Society, who is putting on this webinar for us. And the River Management Society is just an amazing organization. As you can see, there are a lot of good information on the tabs here. The training and events, I would really encourage you to go there. There's so many wonderful resources, such as the River Training Center. There's a YouTube channel, for example, where this and many other webinars are posted. So if you miss them or you want to go back and get more information, there's so much there. The 2027 symposium in Arkansas is, if you are able to travel to that, it's an amazing event. And then resources, and then encourage you to become a member, because it's just, River Management Society is just so supportive. And you can see we support the professionals who study, protect, and manage North America's rivers. So way beyond wild and scenic rivers, there's just so much support and information you can gather from RMS. Next slide. So a little bit more on training. We talked a lot about rivers.gov, and there is a training tab that you can go to, and has a lot of what I've been talking about here. It has core competencies, those technical papers that can help guide you. Just an example, one I refer to all the time is the Section 7 technical paper, which is written by council members. And there's many more. The video series that we've been highlighting, I mentioned the River Training Center, workshops, training modules, and a lot more. And I'll talk a little bit now about NWSI, the National Wilderness Skills Institute, which isn't just about wilderness. It's about wild and scenic rivers. It's about traditional tools and skills. And it has an international ranger component as well, and the North American Ranger group that's developing. It was started in 2021. We had a group of people that we were in the middle of the COVID time, didn't have the opportunity to do in-person training, and we created this virtual and free event for people to join. So I would really encourage you to check it out. Just type in National Wilderness Skills Institute, and you can see that there's lots of recordings. We record almost all of the sessions and have a library of those in all the different tracks that I mentioned. And for 2026, we have a great lineup schedule coming soon. We do a request for proposals every year, and it keeps growing in terms of the really wonderful in-depth information that you can gain there. Join us for one session or the whole 2 days. It'll be June 3rd and 4th this year. And again, virtual and free for you. And for the next slide, I will turn it over to Liz.
So there are some really good sources of information on Partnership Rivers. If you go to the National Park Service website, there is a tab for Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers, nps.gov. And that actually is a wonderful site because it also has all of the websites linked to it of all of the local councils on all of the partnership rivers. So you can actually take a look at, how they're structured, who's involved, and the kind of projects that they're working on. So that's a really excellent place to go. And then there's an article that was written by some of our valued, wonderful sage mentors of the Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers program. And it's the paper that sort of describes the reason for the creation of this whole different category of wild and scenic river, having to do with mostly that non-federal land status, but also the wonderful opportunity to create partnerships and have so many more people involved in managing a wild and scenic river. So I would highly encourage you to visit both of those. And I believe that is it. Next slide.
Thank you, Taylor, and thank you, Liz, for all the information and perspective. I think it's been a really neat and unusual kind of what's similar and what's different between the two parts of the Wild and Scenic River system that are not well known that way. So you've done a fantastic job of kind of comparing and contrasting, and thank you so much. We will take questions now, and then we're going to kind of keep on going. Just to say that we have a couple more Wild and Scenic Rivers webinars this spring. The next one, actually, Taylor is helping us again with Section 7 determinations. And then we'll have a couple of folks talking about managing eligible rivers, which are not all the same, and they're very important part of the system. Those have been identified as potential and not yet designated. So stay tuned for that. We also have hydropower insight webinars this spring, several of those coming up. And we'll be talking about recreational rivers where there is some controls on them, either a dam or voluntary flows from a jurisdiction or whitewater parks. And we would love to have you provide your input by taking the survey today about today's webinar. And we thank you so much for being here. And we'll kind of leave it right there. Thank you. Thank you, Liz and Taylor, so much. Appreciate you.